Okay, let's unpack this. When you think about global diplomacy or maybe international relations, certain pairings probably jump to mind. The big players, strategic blocs, maybe immediate neighbors.
Yeah, the usual suspects.
Exactly. But what about India and a small mountainous Central Asian republic like Kyrgyzstan? It might not be the first relationship you'd picture.
Not immediately, no.
You might even wonder why these two, well, seemingly disparate nations would have significant ties at all. But based on the material we're diving into today, it's a connection that actually runs surprisingly deep. It's built on more than just a handshake, it seems.
Absolutely. It's a really fascinating case study when you look at the details in these sources. What's striking is how the relationship isn't just, broad strokes diplomacy.
Right.
It seems to be built on some really specific, tangible layers you might not expect. We're talking particular economic projects, significant and, well, pretty long-standing defense cooperation that seems quite focused. Historical and cultural ties that actually predate modern nations, and even areas like medical education and soft power playing a role. It's far more intricate than a quick glance might suggest.
Exactly. We've got a stack of material right here, specific articles, research notes, things that lay out the background, the history, and the different facets of this India-Kyrgyz Republic relationship. So we're not just looking at the general landscape, we're digging into the details presented in these sources.
Right. So our mission today, then, is to go through this material together, pull out the most important nuggets of knowledge and insight it contains, and really try to understand what makes this particular bilateral relationship tick, based entirely on what these sources are telling us.
Okay.
We'll look at everything the material covers from, trade and defense links to education, healthcare, and that softer side of diplomacy and shared history.
You get ready to discover some interesting facts and connections that might just, well, reshape how you think about India's foreign relations, or maybe the unexpected places where international ties can deepen. Let's dive in. So, to set the stage, what does the source material tell us about Kyrgyzstan itself? What kind of country are we talking about here, according to these documents?
Well, the sources paint a picture of Kyrgyzstan as a small but notably progressive republic in Central Asia. It highlights that in the period leading up to when this material was compiled, particularly since around 2010, the country had achieved a degree of stabilization. And this came after a period of internal difference and turbulence. It's linked in the sources to what's called the Tulip Revolution, which kind of spanned between 2004 and 2010.
Ah, right, the Tulip Revolution. I remember hearing about that.
So it frames Kyrgyzstan as a nation that was, at the time this was written, finding its footing after a politically challenging period.
Okay, finding stability after a turbulent patch. What about its economic situation, according to the sources? What's the foundation there?
Economically, the material notes that Kyrgyzstan remains primarily agrarian. However, it also points out that the country had opened up its economy for foreign investment in the years following the end of the Cold War.
Makes sense.
And despite that agrarian base, the sources highlight some significant natural resources.
Resources like what? Any specific examples mentioned in the material?
Yes, definitely. The material specifically mentions the Kumtor gold mine. It's described as large and important, a major source of gold exports for them.
Okay, gold. That's fairly common for the region.
True, but here's a surprising detail. The sources state that Kyrgyzstan is the third largest producer of mercury globally.
Mercury?
Yeah, right after Singapore and China, apparently.
The third largest mercury producer globally. That's a very specific and maybe unexpected detail. Does the source elaborate on why that's significant for their economy?
It mostly just presents it as a key resource, highlighting that global ranking. It doesn't go into deep detail on the why of the ranking or its exact economic contribution compared to gold, for instance, but just stating that ranking positions it as a country with notable, maybe niche, resource importance on a global scale. It also mentions Kyrgyzstan's considerable hydroelectric power potential HEP as another key resource area with opportunity.
Okay, so agrarian base, opening to investment. Key resources like gold, mercury, and this HEP potential. That gives us a sense of their economic landscape and maybe their needs. Now, how did this progressive, resource-rich but developing republic first formally establish ties with India?
The sources state that diplomatic relations were established relatively early in Kyrgyzstan's post-Soviet history. India and Kyrgyzstan officially opened diplomatic ties in 1992.
1992. Okay, so almost immediately after Kyrgyzstan gained independence. That suggests an early recognition and maybe an intent to engage from both sides pretty quickly.
Seems that way.
Was there A specific moment or event mentioned that signaled a shift to a more focused relationship later on.
Yes, according to the sources, 2012 was actually quite a significant year. Not only did the two nations celebrate 20 years of diplomatic
Yeah, the
relations,
decades.
marking that milestone,
Right.
but that same year, the first ever India-Central Asia Track 2 diplomatic dialogue took place.
Track two dialogue. That's usually the more informal discussions, right? Involving maybe non-governmental experts, former officials, kind of behind the scenes engagement.
Exactly. And crucially, this important first dialogue was held in Bishkek, the capital of Kyrgyzstan.
Ah, okay. Location matters.
It does, because it was there, during that 2012 dialogue hosted in Bishkek, that India formally announced its Connect CA policy. CA for Central Asia, presumably.
Connect CA. That definitely sounds like a specific strategic pivot or a renewed focus. What did that policy signify, according to the sources?
The sources present this policy announcement in Bishkek as signaling a deliberate, renewed, and focused engagement strategy specifically for the broader Central Asian region.
Right.
So holding that key inaugural dialogue for the whole region and choosing Bishkek as the place to announce this focus policy, well, it really underscores Kyrgyzstan's importance in India's strategic thinking about Central Asia, at least at that particular time.
Yeah, that provides crucial context. It suggests the relationship's trajectory wasn't just organic growth, but maybe influenced by a deliberate policy decision announced right there.
Precisely. It wasn't just a coincidence. It was a deliberate policy statement made on Kyrgyz soil, highlighting their role in India's regional strategy.
That makes perfect sense. Okay, let's move from the foundational diplomacy and policy context to the economic side of things. The sources refer to it as commercial diplomacy. We mentioned Kyrgyzstan needs investment. What specific needs and opportunities does the material highlight there?
The sources emphasize Kyrgyzstan's need for foreign investment, particularly in vital sectors like agriculture, transport infrastructure, and also capitalizing on that hydroelectric power potential we discussed earlier, the HEP.
Okay.
A positive factor highlighted is that Kyrgyzstan apparently has a skilled workforce, which makes it potentially attractive for investors looking to develop industries.
And is the environment generally welcoming for that kind of foreign investment, according to these sources?
Yes, the sources suggest it is. They highlight that the leadership in Kyrgyzstan at the time was described as progressive and pro-industry,
Okay, that helps.
which is generally seen as encouraging for foreign investors. Another specific point noted is the convertibility of the Kyrgyz currency, the som. That simplifies things like financial transactions and repatriation for international partners compared to, say, non-convertible currencies.
Right, practical considerations. So, a need for investment meeting a relatively open and pro-business environment. Does the material give us specific, tangible examples of India acting on these opportunities or providing assistance on the economic front?
It provides several really good, concrete examples. One key area mentioned is agriculture. The sources mention a Memorandum of Understanding, an MOU, on agriculture signed between the two countries back in 2009.
Okay, an MOU. But agreements like that are signed all the time. Did it lead to something real on the ground?
It absolutely did, according to this. Following that MSU, India provided concrete assistance for a very specific project, helping to set up a potato procurement plant in the Talas region of Kyrgyzstan.
A potato plant. And tell us, that sounds incredibly specific. Does the source explain what kind of plant or its purpose?
Yes, it clarifies that the plant is intended for chips production, potato chips.
Okay. Value addition.
Exactly. And beyond just the product, the sources highlight its direct local impact. It was established specifically to provide employment for the local population in that region.
That's a fantastic example. It really grounds the economic cooperation in something tangible with local impact, jobs.
Precisely. It shows Indian cooperation translating directly into job creation and potentially adding value to local agricultural output.
Are there other specific gifts or perhaps infrastructure assistance mentioned in the sources?
Yes, in the healthcare sector, for instance.
Yeah.
The sources mention a specific gift from the Indian government in 2014, a computerized tomography machine, a CT machine.
A CT scanner. Okay.
And it was donated to the National Center for Cardiology and Internal Medicine in Kyrgyzstan. Again, a very concrete instance of assistance aimed at improving healthcare infrastructure.
A direct contribution to their medical facilities. Beyond these specific gifts or projects, does India offer broader economic support, maybe through finance or credit?
The sources indicate that India has indeed been extending lines of credit to Kyrgyzstan. These credits are aimed at helping Kyrgyzstan with establishing and modernizing industrial units across various sectors.
And is there a specific example given of what resulted from these lines of credit, something built or established?
Yes, the sources point to an oil and diesel filling station that was established in the city of Osh, specifically utilizing an Indian credit facility.
An oil and diesel station in Osh.
Okay, so that shows how those broader lines of credit can translate into actual operational infrastructure projects on the ground.
Fascinating. So it's a real mix. Specific targeted projects like the potato plant, direct assistance like the CT scanner, and then broader financial support through these credit lines for industrial development.
Seems to be, yes.
Moving beyond direct investment and assistance, what about just straightforward trade? What goods are flowing between India and Kyrgyzstan, according to the sources?
The sources provide a list of key goods traded. India's exports to Kyrgyzstan include things like pharmaceuticals, which is obviously a major area for India globally, also tea and machinery.
Okay, pharma, tea, machinery out. What comes in?
In the other direction, India imports goods like non-ferrous metals, raw hides, and leather from Kyrgyzstan.
Okay, so pharma, tea, and machinery from India, and raw materials like metals and leather coming back from Kyrgyzstan. That gives us a clear picture of the goods exchanged. What about less tangible forms of exchange like services or maybe the movement of people?
Tourism is highlighted as an important and apparently growing aspect of their relations. The sources note that India is actively contributing to developing this sector in Kyrgyzstan
How so?
by providing training to Kyrgyz nationals, specifically in the hospitality and tourism sectors. So it's about building the human capacity for tourism there.
Investing in the skills of the people who will actually work in tourism. That makes sense if you want to grow the sector. Are there any other connections mentioned that facilitate this people-to-people or tourism link?
Yes, as a point of connection and maybe exposure, the sources mention that Kyrgyzstan has been a regular participant in the Surajkund Fair.
Oh, the crafts mela near Delhi?
That's the one. A well-known international craft mela held annually. Their participation there helps showcase Kyrgyz culture and potential to an Indian audience, presumably including potential tourists.
Okay, so skills training, participation in Indian cultural events. It really seems like a multi-pronged approach to building the economic relationship, including this growing focus on tourism. It feels more nuanced than just, raw trade figures.
I agree. The picture painted is one of diverse engagement.
Now, shifting gears quite dramatically, the sources dedicate a significant portion to something you might not immediately associate with this pairing: defense diplomacy. You mentioned it briefly earlier, but what does the material reveal about military or defense ties between India and, well, landlocked Kyrgyzstan?
It's certainly not the most publicly visible aspect, is it? But the sources reveal some very specific and, frankly, quite intriguing connections in the defense sector. The material mentions a particular facility called JSC Dastan, located in Bishkek.
JSC Dastan, what is that according to the sources?
The sources describe JSC Dastan as Kyrgyzstan's only functional defense production unit. It was originally established by the Russians during the Soviet era.
Kyrgyzstan's only functional defense unit. That alone gives it a unique importance, I suppose. And what kind of defense products does this facility manufacture?
The sources list naval weapons, rocket systems, and crucially, torpedoes as its primary products.
Naval weapons and torpedoes. That's interesting. Given Kyrgyzstan is landlocked, how does India connect with this specific facility?
This is where it gets particularly notable. The sources state that both the Indian Navy and India's Defense Research and Development Organization, DRDO, India's premier defense R&D agency, have established relations with Dastan.
Okay.
And these relations aren't new. They apparently go back as far as the 1990s.
Since the 90s, wow.
So a long-standing connection with Kyrgyzstan's sole defense producer.
A decades-long relationship with a facility producing naval weapons in a landlocked country. Is Dastan the only facility involved in this defense link, according to the sources?
No. The sources also mention India maintaining relations with another facility in Kyrgyzstan called Joint Stock Company Ulan Torpedo Range, or UTR.
UTR, another specific facility name. Was that also a legacy of the Soviet era?
Yes. The sources note that UTR was originally built by the Russians, specifically way back in 1943. Its historical purpose was for the production of naval armaments and submarine parts.
Naval armaments and submarine parts. Again, fascinating geography aside. And India's specific association with this Ulan torpedo range.
India's connection with UTR dates back to 1997, so also quite a while ago, nearly as long as the Dastan link. The sources highlight a dual relationship here that seems quite significant.
Okay.
The Indian Navy not only procures torpedoes from JSC Dastan, but it also undertakes tests at the UTR facility.
Hold on. So India is a customer of Dastan and uses the UTR testing infrastructure, procuring torpedoes from Kyrgyzstan's only defense unit and then testing them at their dedicated torpedo range.
That's what the sources state, yes.
Yeah.
It seems like a very practical, hands-on level of defense cooperation.
It really does. Does the material indicate the significance of this relationship at a high level? Was it recognized?
Yes, it does. The sources mention a specific high-level visit. The erstwhile Indian Defense Minister, A.K. Antony, visited the UTR facility in 2011.
Defense Minister himself.
A visit by the Defense Minister suggests this cooperation, particularly around UTR and these torpedoes, is considered strategically important by India, or at least was at that time.
A defense minister visiting a specific torpedo testing range in a landlocked Central Asian country is certainly not something you hear about every day. Does the material suggest this cooperation is just historical, or is it something that's continuing?
The sources indicate it's very much ongoing, or at least was when the material was compiled. They state that DRDO, the R&D arm, is currently providing assistance for the redevelopment and modernization of the UTR facility.
Redevelopment and modernization assistance from DRDO.
Yes. This points to continued investment and a commitment to this particular aspect of defense cooperation into the future.
So despite Kyrgyzstan being landlocked, India has this specific, long-standing, high-level, and ongoing defense relationship focused on naval capabilities, specifically torpedoes, linked to unique facilities there.
That's definitely one of the most surprising and detailed insights from these sources.
It is quite remarkable.
It certainly raises questions about why this specific focus, what tactical or strategic advantage India might gain from this, but the sources simply present it as a clear area of deep cooperation.
The source material also provides some case studies to give deeper context to the bilateral relationship. One focuses on the political landscape, specifically that turbulent period around the Tulip Revolution. Why is understanding this political history considered important context for the India-Kyrgyz relationship in these sources?
Well, it's presented as crucial context because it explains the internal environment in Kyrgyzstan during key years when its modern relationship with India was developing and, maturing.
Okay.
The sources provide a brief historical overview first, mentioning Kyrgyzstan's history under Russian and then Soviet control. They note it was historically a clan-based society that the Soviets managed to sort of integrate and unify under their system.
So a history of external control layered over internal clan dynamics. What happened after the end of the Soviet Union and the Cold War?
Since gaining independence, Kyrgyzstan apparently embarked on a transition towards democracy. However, the sources make it quite clear this wasn't exactly a smooth process. They highlight that the country experienced two significant uprisings in relatively quick succession.
Two uprisings. Okay, let's look at the first one mentioned.
The first uprising occurred in 2004, which is widely known as the Tulip Revolution. The sources explain that Askar Akayev, who had been the leader since the end of the Cold War,
Right, the first post-Soviet leader.
he began exhibiting authoritarian tendencies over time. The Tulip Revolution in 2004 was essentially a popular movement that ultimately overthrew him.
Okay, so the initial post-Soviet transition leader was removed due to a perceived shift towards authoritarianism. Who succeeded him?
Akayev was replaced by Kurmanbek Bakiev.
And did Bakiev bring the hoped-for stability or democratic progress?
According to the sources, no. They state that Bakiev was also ousted in 2010, just 6 years later.
Wow, okay.
And the reason cited in the sources is explicit. It was for very similar reasons as his predecessor, a return to authoritarian tendencies and widespread discontent with his rule.
So, two presidents overthrown by popular uprisings within about a decade, both due to accusations of becoming authoritarian. That clearly illustrates the period of internal turbulence the sources mentioned right at the start.
It certainly does.
What about the situation in Kyrgyzstan as of when the source material was written? Did it stabilize?
The sources note that following the 2010 uprising, Almazbek Sharshenovich Atambayev had been in power since 2011. The framing here is that his presidency represented a period of relative stabilization after those significant political upheavals of 2004 and 2010.
Okay, so understanding this history, the clan dynamics, the difficult democratic transition, these two revolutionary periods, it's vital because it shows India was building and deepening its relationship with a country that was actively navigating some profound internal political challenges.
Absolutely. It highlights perhaps the resilience of the bilateral ties to persist through significant instability on the Kyrgyz side.
That's a really interesting point. Okay, another case study presented in the material focuses on medical tourism, education, and assistance. This seems like a very different vector of connection compared to, say, defense or high-level political shifts.
It is, and it's a connection that impacts a large number of individuals directly, it seems. The sources point out a significant trend in recent years: a growing number of Indian students choosing to go to Kyrgyzstan, specifically for MBBS education, medical school.
A flow of Indian students heading to Kyrgyzstan for medical degrees. What's the primary reason driving this trend, according to the sources? Is it the quality or?
The key driver explicitly mentioned in the material is the cost factor. Studying medical education in Kyrgyzstan is presented as involving significantly lesser costs compared to pursuing those same degrees back in India.
Okay. Cost.
That makes it an attractive option, presumably, for many Indian students and families seeking medical training.
So it's primarily an economic decision for the students and their families. Are there any challenges or implications highlighted regarding this educational flow?
The sources do highlight a specific need or potential challenge: the importance of achieving bilateral recognition of degrees between the two countries.
Makes sense.
If large numbers of students are getting their medical degrees in Kyrgyzstan, ensuring those qualifications are formally recognized and accepted back in India is obviously crucial for their future careers.
Absolutely. Recognition is key for any overseas education. Beyond student education, does India assist Kyrgyzstan in the medical field itself, maybe in research or infrastructure?
Yes, the sources detail several forms of assistance. One intriguing example is the Mountain Biomedical Research Center.
Okay.
This center was established with assistance from India's DRDO, the same Defense Research and Development Organization involved in the defense ties we discussed.
DRDO, helping establish a medical research center. That seems like an unusual collaboration. A defense agency and biomedical research. What's the focus of this center?
The sources state that the center's aim is to study multiple possible acclimation methods.
Acclimation, like adjusting to altitude.
Exactly. Given Kyrgyzstan's mountainous geography, it's a very high-altitude country. Focusing on how human bodies adapt to challenging environments like mountains makes perfect sense in that context.
Okay, I see the connection now.
It's research potentially relevant for military personnel operating in high-altitude environments, perhaps, but also for civilian health. This connection between DRDO and medical research is definitely an interesting detail from the source material. It might hint at potential dual-use applications, or maybe just a broader mandate for DRDO assistance than one might assume.
Studying acclimation methods in a mountainous country with defense research involvement. Okay. Does India provide broader support for Kyrgyzstan's healthcare infrastructure beyond research?
Yes, the sources note that beyond specific gifts like that CT machine we mentioned, India has also been providing assistance aimed at establishing a super specialty hospital and a diagnostic center in Kyrgyzstan.
A hospital and diagnostic center.
Yes, so this shows a multifaceted involvement in the healthcare sector, covering education through the student flow, research through the biomedical center, and direct infrastructure development with hospitals and diagnostic facilities.
So it's really a comprehensive medical link. You've got training for Kyrgyz nationals potentially happening in India, Indian students going to Kyrgyzstan for study, joint research on relevant topics like high altitude, and India helping build out healthcare facilities in Kyrgyzstan. It covers a lot of ground.
It certainly appears to be a broad engagement in that sector.
The source material also includes an analysis of a key high-level interaction. The Indian Prime Minister's visit to Kyrgyzstan in 2015. Visits at this level are usually pretty significant, right? Plan to reinforce and advance the relationship.
Absolutely. A prime ministerial visit is a significant diplomatic event. It's designed to signal commitment and often to launch new initiatives or highlight existing ones. The sources note that the Indian PM visited Kyrgyzstan in 2015 and held discussions with Almazbek Atambayev, who, as we mentioned, was the president of Kyrgyzstan at that time, according to the material.
Right. What specific engagements did the prime minister participate in during that visit that the sources highlight as significant?
The sources detail several activities. For instance, the PM visited the Victory Movement Memorial in Bishkek and paid homage to Kyrgyz martyrs. This is presented as a respectful gesture, acknowledging and honoring Kyrgyzstan's history and sacrifices.
A symbolic gesture of respect important in diplomacy. Were there cultural elements to the visit mentioned?
Yes, the sources mention a specific cultural gift. The PM gifted the Kyrgyz president a fine silk hand-knotted carpet.
Ah, classic diplomatic gift.
It adds that touch of cultural exchange to the formal proceedings.
Nice detail. Did the visit connect with any of the specific cooperation areas we've already been discussing? Did he see any of these projects?
It did. The sources note that the PM also visited the Mountain Biomedical Research Center.
Oh, the DRDO-assisted one?
Yes, the one we just discussed that was established with DRDO assistance and focuses on acclimation studies. His visit there served to highlight and reinforce that collaborative effort in the research field.
Okay, so recognizing the joint research initiatives. And was there a major practical outcome or maybe a new initiative launched during this visit that the sources emphasize?
Yes, arguably the most significant practical outcome highlighted is the launch of a telemedicine link.
Telemedicine, how did that work?
This initiative directly connects hospitals in Kyrgyzstan with major hospitals in India. The sources specifically mention Apollo Hospitals and AIMS, the All India Institute of Medical Sciences.
Wow. A direct telemedicine link between hospitals in Kyrgyzstan and major Indian medical centers like Apollo and AIMS. That's a very concrete, high-tech form of cooperation in healthcare.
It seems so.
It directly leverages India's medical expertise and infrastructure to benefit, presumably, patients and doctors in Kyrgyzstan. It builds directly on those medical links we discussed and sounds like a flagship outcome of that high-level visit.
That's certainly how the sources present it as a key initiative.
Let's turn now to another case study presented in the sources. Soft diplomacy and connecting cultures. This looks at the deeper, perhaps less visible ties that might underpin the relationship.
Right, and this section introduces a truly fascinating historical figure who provides a surprising link between the two nations. Khwaja Syed Muhammad Qutbuddin Bakhtiar Kaki.
That name sounds familiar, significant in Indian history, particularly Sufi history, right? Who was he, and what's his connection to Kyrgyzstan, according to these sources?
Well, the sources state that Khwaja Syed Muhammad Qutbuddin Bakhtiar Kaki was actually born in the city of Osh in Kyrgyzstan.
Born in Osh, really?
That's what the material says. And his connection to India is indeed profound. He is credited with popularizing the Chishti order of Sufism and the ideology of Moinuddin Chishti in Delhi.
So, a major figure in the history of Sufism in India, a key saint, actually originated from what is now Kyrgyzstan. That's a deep historical and cultural thread connecting the two places.
Exactly. The sources describe him as a very popular Sufi figure in India during the rule of the Delhi Sultans, specifically mentioning Ayabak and Iltutmish. He conveyed a powerful message of universal brotherhood, peace, and charity.
Wow.
So this establishes a historical and spiritual link between the lands that would become India and Kyrgyzstan centuries before modern diplomatic ties were even conceived. It's presented as a deep cultural foundation.
Wow. A Sufi saint born in Osh who became a pivotal figure in Delhi, promoting peace and brotherhood. That is a remarkable historical link the sources bring to light. How does the material connect this ancient history to modern diplomacy? Does it make that link?
It does. The sources explain how India consciously tried to continue this legacy of peace and brotherhood through its soft diplomacy efforts in the modern era. It specifically highlights actions taken during that 2015 Prime Minister's visit we just discussed.
Okay, so connecting the PM's visit back to this historical figure, and what was the specific action mentioned as an example of this soft diplomacy connecting to that legacy?
The specific action detailed is that during the 2015 visit, the Indian Prime Minister unveiled a statue of Mahatma Gandhi in Kyrgyzstan.
A Gandhi statue, okay.
The sources explicitly frame this as a symbolic act. By placing a statue of Gandhi, India's modern icon of peace, nonviolence, and universalism in Kyrgyzstan, India was drawing a symbolic line,
Ah, so
connecting its modern values, embodied by Gandhi, to that shared historical legacy and the Sufi tradition of universal brotherhood that originated in part from a figure born in Osh centuries ago.
that's a really insightful connection the sources are making, linking an ancient Sufi message of harmony that has roots in Kyrgyzstan to Gandhi's modern message of peace, symbolized by installing a statue. It feels like a very deliberate and thoughtful use of soft power and cultural diplomacy, leveraging those deep historical roots.
It's presented exactly that way, as a conscious linkage.
Finally, the sources look ahead and identify potential future areas of cooperation between India and the Kyrgyz Republic. What are the key growth areas highlighted there?
Tourism comes up again as a key area with significant, maybe still untapped potential. The sources use a very evocative and, well, flattering description for Kyrgyzstan in this context. They call it, rightly called, the Switzerland of the East.
The Switzerland of the East. That certainly conjures images of stunning natural beauty, mountains, lakes. Clearly a potential draw for tourism. How does the material suggest this potential can be further developed through bilateral cooperation?
Well, it connects back to the efforts already underway that were mentioned earlier. India is already providing hospitality training to Kyrgyz youth,
Right, the skills build
which
up.
is seen as building the necessary skills base for a thriving tourism sector. The sources suggest this area can be strengthened significantly in the future. Specifically, they note the potential for India to invest foreign direct investment, FDI, directly in Kyrgyzstan's hospitality sector.
Ah, so moving beyond just training to potentially helping build or finance hotels, resorts, and other tourism infrastructure.
Exactly. That seems to be the suggestion, moving from building skills to potentially building the physical infrastructure needed to really capitalize on that Switzerland of the East potential.
Okay, that's a clear path for growth. What's the other major area identified for future collaboration?
The other significant area highlighted is agriculture, but with a very specific and quite unique focus. The sources point out a unique aspect of Kyrgyz agriculture. They apparently have a complete ban on the use of chemical fertilizers.
A complete ban, so only organic.
They exclusively practice organic farming, according to this material.
Wow. That's a strong environmental stance and certainly a niche focus in today's world. How does India, with its vast and, let's face it, often chemically intensive agricultural sector, fit into potential cooperation here?
It's an interesting question. The sources suggest there's potential for India to share best practices in agriculture with Kyrgyzstan, particularly in areas that could perhaps complement or enhance their organic approach.
So, not trying to change their approach, but enhance it.
Exactly. It's framed not as a one-way transfer of knowledge, but as an exchange for mutual development. India has immense experience in areas like, say, irrigation efficiency, developing drought-resistant crop varieties perhaps, or maybe large-scale organic farming practices that could be relevant.
And India might learn something too.
Potentially. India might learn from Kyrgyzstan's experience and commitment to maintaining a completely fertilizer-free system on a national scale. It's presented as a potential mutually beneficial knowledge exchange in the agricultural sphere, particularly around sustainability.
Sharing expertise, especially in the context of organic farming and sustainability, building on Kyrgyzstan's unique approach. That's another very specific and potentially impactful area for future collaboration that these sources highlight. It's interesting how these potential future areas really link back to Kyrgyzstan's natural resources, the beauty for tourism, the land for organic farming.
Yes, playing to their strengths, it seems.
So we've really taken a comprehensive look, a deep dive into the relationship between India and the Kyrgyz Republic, based entirely on the layers of detail provided in this source material we've been discussing.
And what the sources show us, I think, is a relationship that is surprisingly multifaceted and definitely deeper than maybe headlines or common perception might suggest.
Absolutely.
From the foundational diplomacy established early on and that strategic Connect CA policy, through the growing economic ties involving very specific projects like the potato plant and the lines of credit, to the, well, frankly remarkable and ongoing defense cooperation centered uniquely around naval capabilities and torpedoes.
And extending into crucial links in medical education for Indian students, collaborative research like that Mountain Biomedical Center with DRDO involvement, healthcare infrastructure assistance, and perhaps most compellingly, those deep, centuries-old historical and cultural connections consciously leveraged through modern soft diplomacy like the Gandhi statue.
Exactly. Exploring this specific source material has allowed us, I hope, to move beyond generalizations and see the specific tangible details, the names of facilities like Dastin and UTR, the types of goods actually traded, the purpose of specific projects, the historical figures like Bakhtiar Kaki, the reason behind student migration, the function of that research center. It reveals a bilateral relationship built on a unique convergence of strategic, economic, and cultural interests, at least as depicted here.
It certainly highlights how complex and layered bilateral relationships can be, even between countries that aren't, immediate geographical neighbors or necessarily major players in every single global arena. These connections are often forged through specific needs, historical accidents, strategic opportunities, and just deliberate diplomatic effort over time.
And that brings us to a final provocative thought for you, our listeners, to consider pulling together the insights from this deep dive. Given these revealed historical ties going back centuries, The very specific and somewhat unusual strategic defense links focusing on naval technology despite the geography, and the clear potential for growth in niche areas like high-end tourism and organic agriculture.
Yeah.
How might this seemingly quiet bilateral relationship between India and the Kyrgyz Republic evolve? Could it play a more significant, perhaps even an outsized role in regional dynamics in Central Asia in the future? Or maybe contribute in unexpected ways to broader global trade patterns or India's soft power influence in the coming years?
And perhaps more broadly, what does the intricate detail of this particular relationship tell us about the complex and often surprising connections that might exist between other nations around the world, maybe hiding just beneath the surface of public view? Something to think about.